Good morning. Thank you for joining me today. This morning we'll be in Mark chapter 7, verses 24, through chapter 8, verse 10. After Jesus left there, he went to the region of Tyre. When he went into a house, he did not want anyone to know, but he was not able to escape notice. Instead, a woman whose young daughter had an unclean spirit immediately heard about him and came and fell at his feet. The woman was a Greek, of Syrophoenician origin. She asked him to cast the demon out of her daughter. He said to her, "Let the children be satisfied first, for it is not right to take the children's bread and to throw it to the dogs." She answered, "Yes, Lord, but even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then he said to her, "Because you said this, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." She went home and found the child lying on the bed, and the demon gone. Then Jesus went out again from the region of Tyre and came through Sidon to the Sea of Galilee in the region of the Decapolis. They brought to him a deaf man who had difficulty speaking, and they asked him to place his hands on him. After Jesus took him aside privately, away from the crowd, he put his fingers in the man's ears, and after spitting, he touched his tongue. Then he looked up to heaven and said with a sigh, "Ephphatha," that is, "be opened." And immediately the man's ears were opened, his tongue loosened, and he spoke plainly. Jesus ordered them not to tell anything, but as much as he ordered them not to do this, they proclaimed it all the more. People were completely astounded and said, "He has done everything well. He even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak." In those days there was another large crowd with nothing to eat. So Jesus called his disciples and said to them, "I have compassion on the crowd, because they have already been here with me 3 days, and they have nothing to eat. If I send them home hungry, they will faint on the way, and some of them have come from a great distance." His disciples answered him, "Where can someone get enough bread in this desolate place to satisfy these people?" He asked them, "How many loaves do you have?" They replied, 7. Then he directed the crowd to sit down on the ground. After he took the 7 loaves and gave thanks, he broke them and began giving them to the disciples to serve. So they served the crowd. They also had a few small fish. After giving thanks for these, he told them to serve these as well. Everyone ate and was satisfied, and they picked up the broken pieces left over, 7 baskets full. There were about 4,000 who ate. Then he dismissed them. Immediately he got into a boat with his disciples and went to the district of Dalmanatha. Then the Pharisees came and began to argue with Jesus, asking for a sign from heaven to test him. Sighing deeply in his spirit, he said, "Why does this generation look for a sign? I tell you the truth, no sign will be given to this generation." Then he left them, got back into the boat, and went to the other side. Now they had forgotten to take bread, except for 1 loaf they had with them in the boat. And Jesus ordered them, "Watch out, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and the yeast of Herod." So they began to discuss with one another about having no bread. When he learned of this, Jesus said to them, "Why are you arguing about having no bread? Do you still not see or understand? Have your hearts been hardened? Though you have eyes, don't you see? And though you have ears, can't you hear? Don't you remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of pieces did you pick up?" They replied, 12. "When I broke the 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many basketfuls of pieces did you pick up?" They replied, 7. Oh my, I was supposed to stop at 10. My apologies. Yeah, so that stops at immediately he got into a boat with his disciples and went to the district of Dalmanatha. Okay, so you have here this Syrophoenician woman whose child was demon-possessed, and Jesus heals. This man who was in the region of the Decapolis, who was deaf and had difficulty speaking, and Jesus opened his ears and loosened his tongue, and he spoke plainly. And then you have 4,000 being fed. and Jesus going over with his disciples in a boat. So, the Syrophoenician woman, he says to her, let the children be satisfied first, for it is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. So, is Jesus using a racial slur against this woman? No. From what I've heard, the word that he used here is kunarian, which is not the derogatory word that somebody might use to call somebody a dog, but more akin to something like puppies, which, from Jesus' image that he's painting here of people at a table and dogs under the table, it's not like some wild, mangy thing that's running around tearing animals apart. It's the family dogs, for one. And you can see that the woman takes no offense at this. She agrees with Jesus and says, "Yes, Lord," in Mark 7:28. But even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. So, yeah, it's not as though Jesus commits sin here, much as the progressive pastor might want to find it. In fact, Jesus had traveled here to the region of Tyre and Sidon to visit these Gentiles. Jesus traveled some 50 miles north to visit these Gentile cities. This was unusual in Jesus' ministry because his focus was on the lost sheep of Israel. And if Jesus was displaying racial prejudice, it would have been very easy for him to not go to these cities. Because at the time of Jesus, there were Jewish traditions that said a faithful Jew would have nothing to do with the Gentiles and would never even enter a Gentile's house. The previous incident shows Jesus wiping out the distinction between clean and unclean foods. Can it be that here, in symbol, we have him wiping out the difference between clean and unclean people? Just as a Jew would never soil his lips with forbidden foods, so he would never soil his life by contact with the unclean Gentile. Yeah, and then also, later in the book of Acts, you have kind of the same paradigm there of first the clean-unclean distinction being wiped out as far as food goes, again with the vision of Peter, where you have this sheet that's dropped down from heaven with all of these different animals in it. And the Lord says to him, "Arise, Peter, kill and eat." And this happens 3 times. And then you have the conversion of the, I want to say, centurion and his household, that he was at least Roman and definitely Gentile, him and his family. And they became Christian, and the Holy Spirit entered them. So, yeah, you have kind of that same paradigm in both places. Wanted no one to know it. At the same time, Jesus didn't want to needlessly offend people. He knew that the time for breaking down the wall between Jew and Gentile by bringing them into one body was still in the future, so while not keeping his presence in the region of Tyre and Sidon strictly secret, he did not want it publicized. Yeah, in that day, Jews often called Gentiles dogs in a very derogatory way. To the Greek, the word dog meant a shameless and audacious woman. It was used exactly with the connotation that we use the word um, bitch today. To the Jews, it was equally a term of contempt. Yet Jesus did not use the normal word for dogs. Instead, he softened it into little dogs, essentially reminding the woman of her place as a Gentile, yet not wanting to push her completely away. In Greek, diminutives are characteristically affectionate. Jesus took the sting out of the word. The woman responded with great faith. First, she accepted her low place before Jesus by not debating the reference to little dogs. Second, she asked Jesus to deal with her on her own low level. She therefore received from Jesus. We need to see the power of coming to God as we are, and letting him make true his promises to those weak and unclean. If the woman had responded, "Who are you calling a dog?" she would not have received from Jesus what her daughter needed. Her humble, faith-filled submission to Jesus brought the victory. Nothing appealed to our blessed Lord more than faith coupled with humility. Yeah. And as Gentiles, Paul says essentially that we are a wild olive tree, not the cultivated olive tree from which branches were broken off for us to be grafted in. They begged him to put his hand on him, this man who couldn't hear or see, or what was it? Yeah, couldn't hear or speak, rather. He took him aside, put his fingers in his ears, and he spat and touched his tongue. Jesus used a curious manner in healing this man. Throughout his ministry, Jesus used many different ways of healing. He healed with a word, healed without a word, healed in response to one's faith, healed in response to the faith of another, healed those who asked, and healed those who approached. Jesus didn't want to be tied down to any one method, to show that his power was not dependent on any method, but on the sovereign power of God. Many people cared about this man, and perhaps many had prayed for his healing, but no one ever stuck their fingers in his ear and spit on his tongue like this. Jesus did something completely new to catch this man's attention because he could not catch his attention with words. Through touch and the use of the spittle, Jesus entered into the mental world of the man and gained his confidence. Undoubtedly, Jesus knew there was something special in his manner that would minister to this man. He adapts his method to the peculiar circumstances of need of the one with whom he is dealing. I am quite convinced if we could perfectly know these men, we should discover the reason for the method. In each case, Christ adapted himself to the need of the man. He sighed, "Behold, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. Behold, a man exercising a ministry of healing power and elemental light. But never forget that this service was costly." Immediately his ears were opened, and the impediment of his tongue was loosed, and he spoke plainly. The ancient Greek word for impediment in his speech is magalelon, probably butchering that horribly, and is only used here in the New Testament. It is a word that is also used once in the Septuagint translation of the Old Testament in Isaiah 35, 5 and 6. "Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf shall be unstopped. Then the lame shall leap like a deer, and the tongue of the dumb, magalelon, sing. For waters shall burst forth in the wilderness, and streams in the desert." Mark wants us to know that the Messiah was here, bringing the glorious benefits of his rule. And then you have this multitude who's hungry in the wilderness. And the disciples say, "How can one satisfy these people with bread here in the wilderness?" We can imagine Jesus hoping one of the disciples might say, "Jesus, you did this before. You can do the same kind of work again." Jesus hoped they would regard his past faithfulness as a promise to meet their present need. "How many loaves do you have?" Jesus asked them to give up their own food this time. Before they used the food of the little boy, but this time Jesus made the disciples give. They also had a few small fish. It seems that the disciples kept the fish from Jesus until they saw he could multiply the bread. They needed to see that we are safe giving everything to Jesus. Why are these not mentioned before? Could it be that they have been withheld by the doubting disciples until they saw how the bread was multiplied? Apparently the fishes were blessed separately and then distributed as the bread had been. So they ate and were filled, and they took up 7 large baskets of leftover fragments. At the end of the meal, they gathered more bread than they had to begin with. This was a miraculous provision. The 7 large baskets showed that God provided out of his abundance. Some scholars argue that this specific miracle never happened. They claim that this was merely a retelling of the feeding of the 5,000. Their main argument is, how could the disciples forget Jesus' previous work so quickly? Yet, even mature Christians, having experienced God's power and provision, sometimes go on to act in unbelief. This wasn't so surprising after all. Yeah. Anywho, carrying on. Psalm chapter 41, verses 1 through 13. How blessed is the one who treats the poor properly. When trouble comes, the Lord delivers him. May the Lord protect him and save his life. May he be blessed in the land. Do not turn him over to his enemies. The Lord supports him on his sickbed. You completely heal him from his illness. As for me, I said, O Lord, have mercy on me. Heal me, for I have sinned against you. My enemies ask this cruel question about me. When will he finally die and be forgotten? When someone comes to visit, he pretends to be friendly. He thinks of ways to defame me. And when he leaves, he slanders me. All who hate me whisper insults about me to one another. They plan ways to harm me. They say, an awful disease overwhelms him, and now that he is bedridden, he will never recover. Even my close friend whom I trusted, he who shared meals with me, has turned against me. As for you, O Lord, have mercy on me and raise me up so I can pay them back. By this I know that you are pleased with me, for my enemy does not triumph over me. As for me, you uphold me because of my integrity. You allow me permanent access to your presence. The Lord God of Israel deserves praise in the future and forevermore. We agree. We agree. Yeah. It's interesting. In 41:1, it says, how blessed is the one who treats the poor properly. When trouble comes, the Lord delivers him. It's interesting that you have this singular again for the one. And other messianic type things in here are all who hate me whisper insults about me to one another. They plan ways to harm me, which they certainly did to Jesus. For 41:10, it says, as for me, O Lord, have mercy on me and raise me up so I can pay them back. One who was dead and the Lord raised up so that he can ultimately pay them back is Jesus. You uphold me because of my integrity. You allow me permanent access to your presence. And Jesus serves as our permanent high priest. Yeah. Anywho, Proverbs chapter 10, verses 15 and 16. The wealth of a rich person is like a fortified city, but the poor are brought to ruin by their poverty. The reward which the righteous receive is life. The recompense which the wicked receive is judgment. Yeah. Um, there's multiple places, I think, where the wealth of a rich person is compared to a fortified city. Um, but I think it says something about, in a different proverb, that it won't actually deliver in the day of trouble. Um, yeah, 1811, the wealth of a rich person is like a strong city, and it is like a high wall in his estimation. But that's not quite the one. Hmm, not finding it. Oh well. Let's see what Guzik has to say. The principle observes that wealth gives a measure of protection and provision in this world to the rich man. But the poverty is the destruction of the poor. In this world, poverty puts the poor man at a great disadvantage, sometimes leading to their destruction. This is a plain recognition of the power of wealth and the paralysis of poverty. It is a wholesome corrective to much nonsense talked today about the blessings of poverty. Wealth may become a curse, but poverty is inherently a destruction. You may be called to forego wealth. You must certainly rate it below honesty. But don't affect to despise it. Don't embrace poverty out of laziness or romanticism. The labor of the righteous leads to life. The wages of the wicked to sin. Wickedness has a reward, and it is sin, and the judgment due to it. Romans 6:23, the wages of sin is death. The labor of the righteous leads to life. For the righteous man or woman, labor is life-giving and leads to life. They understand that our calling to co-labor with God is a life-giving gift. Anywho, thank you so much for joining me today. Hope you have a great day. Bye.